Hi everyone, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for The Light in Hidden Places by Sharon. This is a young adult historical fiction novel about a teenage girl in Poland in the 1940s. She works for a Jewish family, and then when the Germans invade Poland, she makes a decision to hide some of the members of the family, and for the rest of the war, she hides Jewish people in her apartment and keeps them safe. I picked this up as an arc from my work. This was released on March 3rd. I read it around March 3rd. So I'm a little bit slow on the uptake here, but I did really enjoy this book. I gave it 3 stars and I thought it was a very worthwhile read. But there were two major things, I think, that made it not for me and kind of misled my expectations a little bit. And the first is my own fault, like 100% it is my fault. Going into this book, I expected it to be a little bit older based. I expected it to be a young adult book that was kind of intended for older teenagers, like 17-year-olds, because the main character is 17 and usually the audience is kind of intended to be the same age as the main character. So I did expect that going in, and this book is, I think, geared toward a younger young adult audience. Like, still young adult, definitely not middle grade, but maybe like 13, 14-year-olds instead of like 16, 17-year-olds. And it does make a little bit of a difference. I don't read a whole lot of younger YA, and I do think I enjoy this book a little bit less just as a result of that. But obviously, if you are someone who quite enjoys younger YA, if you like books that are geared towards like 13-year-olds, I would recommend this. And again, that was very much my own fault and my own not doing research. It says on one of the front pages that it's like for ages 12 and up. And like I 100% believe that. That does feel like an accurate rating for this book. Kind of a younger YA range, and this is something I'd have adored when I was 13. Like if I had read this book like late middle school, early high school, this is 100% the kind of book I'd have fallen in love with and just like devoured in one sitting. It's just one of those really easy, really good books that's like so interesting to read and so much fun and so enjoyable. So, I'm not saying anything bad about the age range or who it's directed towards. It wasn't what I expected going in. And the second thing that I kind of had an actual issue with that misled me a little bit was the synopsis of this book. And this is an arc, so I did actually check the synopsis on the book that has been released, and it's the exact same. So I have no problems just critiquing the synopsis. Usually synopses are like the starting off point for a book. Like the synopsis will tell you the overall premise of the book, kind of maybe the first like 50 or so pages, and then it kind of leaves off where the meat of the book starts. It tells you like this is going to be the main conflict and kind of stops there. The synopsis on this is just a summary of pretty much the entire book. I think the synopsis stops around page 320. And this book is only about 370 pages long. So you have about 50 pages that happen after the synopsis on the back ends. And I say that's misleading, first of all, because I don't expect the synopsis to go that far. So I kept waiting for her to start hiding her Jewish friends. And I kept waiting for that to be like a thing that happened. And it doesn't happen until about halfway through the book. And I kept like being like, oh, this is like the beginning part. This is the introduction part. And it's like, well, when you're 250 pages into a book, clearly you're not just in the introduction anymore. So it did impact my enjoyment in that way. And also it sucks to know like the entire outline of a book when you start it. Like, and I get that this is based on a true story. So there is kind of less of a spoiler to deal with there. It's not so much spoilers that I'm worried about. I just like to see the story unfold as I'm reading the actual book and not like get the bullet points of the summary of the book on the back, which is kind of what it felt like. And I wasn't a fan of that. And if you do pick this up, I'd honestly recommend just reading like the first paragraph of the synopsis, because that's what I feel like a synopsis should pretty much be. Because everything else just like, it basically spoils the book, and I found it kind of unpleasant towards the reading experience. The only other negative I had for this book was that I do think it's a little bit too fast-paced, and it does feel like there are too many events that happen in this book. And like I said before, this is based off a true story, and Sharon actually mentions in the author's note that if she'd included like every event in Stefania's life, if she'd included everything that happened and like she wanted to, this would have been a 1,000-page book. And I totally understand that. But it did feel like while I was reading it, it was a little bit like I was skim reading Stefania's life instead of actually like experiencing it. And that might have a little bit to do with the fact that it is geared towards a younger audience, so it's a little bit faster paced, as I think younger books tend to be in my experience. But it did feel like I was skim reading someone's life instead of reading like a full book of it. And I wish it'd been slowed down a little bit, or that maybe she'd cut more things out, because there was a few extraneous things in there, and she added a couple of things that weren't actually true. Like, she talked about it in her author's note at the end that like really didn't add anything to the story, so I wasn't a fan of that. But it just felt like it was too fast paced, and I wanted her to slow down and take more time with all these events, because it just seemed like there was too much crammed into this for the length of the story. Even like it's approaching 400 pages, which is, I feel like, pretty long for a historical fiction young adult novel, especially one that's geared towards like a younger audience. But I think she should have slowed it down, and I think it would have been a better book for that. But like honestly, all the negatives out of the way, I really enjoyed this. It took me 3 days to read, and that was only because I had to work so much during those 3 days, and I got a terrible headache. Like, this is the kind of book that I could just sit down and devour in one sitting, because it's so enjoyable and it's such easy reading, and like easy reading in that good way, where it's just like it immerses you in the story and you don't have to do any work. You're just like experiencing it. And it was so lovely to read a book like that, because I think it's been a while since I picked up one that just grabbed me so quickly. Like this, from the first page, I was like, I'm down. I'm interested. I like this main character. I like learning about her life, and I'm rooting for her and her friends to get through the war. And like, she's so young when all these things are happening to her, because she winds up having to take care of her 6-year-old sister alone, and she's like 17 herself. And it's so easy to forget almost reading this book that like she's just a kid herself. Like, for all that she's treated as the main breadwinner of this household, with like a bunch of Jewish people who are hiding so they can't go out, they can't work, they can't really do any chores, and the only other person is her 6-year-old little sister. So she's doing everything. Like, she has everything riding on her shoulders, and she's just a teenager, and it's really interesting and really heartbreaking. I think my favorite part of this book was the epilogue, when Cameron was actually talking about the real Stefania Podgorski. I don't know how to pronounce her name, because she was a real person, and this book is like very heavily based on that, and it sticks, except for a couple of things, it sticks very close to her real story. And I think you could really see that. And there were some issues with that, just because not every true story is really like tailored towards telling in a novel form, because not everything like fits the perfect narrative, because it's real events. Like, not everything does fit a perfect narrative. But I think Sharon Cameron did a really good job in this book, just like handling that and like making adjustments as needed, but still sticking very close to the story. And I loved reading about like who Stefania really was, like in the epilogue, when she was talking about her life and her life after the war and what happened. It was really interesting, and I think it was a worthwhile book. It was a fun book. Like, I only gave it 3 stars because I do think that's about where my enjoyment was. But this is a book I would highly recommend if you like historical fiction that's a little bit younger. Like, I do tend to prefer like books that are like geared towards like older YA and adult books, and then some middle grade. And this is kind of in that weird middle ground for me, where it's like it's kind of meant for like 13, 14 year olds, and that's not kind of an area that I really read a whole lot. So if you are someone who reads that a lot and this sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend this book, because I think it was really worthwhile, and I do think you would really enjoy it. Like, that ending made me tear up, honestly, just like the epilogue and talking about Stefania's real life. And I thought it was a really lovely book, a really well done book, and I don't know, like, only 3 stars, but the kind of 3 stars where I'm gonna pass this along, because I do think that other people would really, really love this. Like, really, when I was 13, this probably would have been like one of my favorite books. And it's a little bit sad to me that I read it now and not then. And I don't say that in like, oh, my standards have risen. Like, I have higher standards now. Like, so this book isn't like as good as I thought it was at 13. But like, it's just that at 13, this is exactly the kind of thing that I loved. And as an adult, this isn't the kind of thing that I love anymore. I still quite like it, and I quite like this book, but I can just feel how much my younger self would have adored this, and I do think other people really will as well. Let me know down below if you've read The Light in Hidden Places and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.